federal budget cuts are impacting Hawaii nonprofits.
We talked to leaders across the sector about what Hawaii is feeling now and what could be down the pike. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suchi and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, thanks for tuning in here to Spotlight Now on Hawaii News Now. We always like to begin our conversation with our guests by encouraging all of you tuning in to also participate in the conversation. You can add your comments and questions for our guests on Facebook at our Hawaii News Now page.
And we've been talking a lot over the last few months about the changes at the federal level, the priorities of this new administration, and what it means for various sectors in our economy here in Hawaii. Today, we are shining the spotlight on the nonprofit sector, and we want to begin our conversation with Sean Kanaiaupuni, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer at Partners in Development Foundation, a very foundational and important nonprofit in our community. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So just for folks who are not familiar, and I think the thing about PIDF is that a lot of people are really familiar with your programs, but not necessarily the name of the organization that's funding them. Tutu and Me and some others. Tell us a little bit about the areas that you cover and the people you serve.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great question. I always love answering it. Partners in Development Foundation, we're a local, community-run nonprofit that, started off maybe 28 years ago with a few people in our community looking around and saying, hey, there are families who need greater access to early childhood education and services and social services. How do we be a part of that? And they created the organization. Tutu and Me was our first program. It's our legacy program and provides early childhood education and caregiver support for families where maybe the kupuna, the elders in the family, are taking care of the young keiki while other family members work. And ever since then, we've been growing and doing more to serve our community with just amazing appreciation for the privilege to do so.
Let's talk a little bit about how much these nonprofits and the work that you provide and the services are reliant on federal funds. Leading into this past year and what we're seeing and what we're hearing of the changes that can happen, how much of that were these organizations and these services provided reliant on federal funds?
Well, I guess it's a really good story, and it's kind of a scary story at the same time. The good news is that for at least almost 2 decades, Partners in Development Foundation and other community organizations like Keiki o Ka'aina and In Peace have been very successful at bringing federal dollars in to support families throughout the state. For example, our Tutu and Me program, which you mentioned, is in 38 communities across the state. So we're highly decentralized from Kaunakakai, Molokai to Waianae. And families in our communities have come to rely on those services and providing our youngest keiki that fresh start. As a result of our success, almost, we've been kind of like a little engine, bringing in the funds, providing more services, scaling our work. And now with the threatened cuts to the Native Hawaiian Education Program in the U.S. DOE, the National Administrative Offices, we are looking at zero possibly being the outcome of next year's funding. $0 to an organization like PIDF means about 72% of our funding.
Wow,
Yeah, so
72% of your funding. And just so folks have some context, let's show some video of some of these programs. I know that you had shared that with us. When we think about who you're serving, to lose 70% or more of your funding, what is the consequence of that? Who does that affect the most?
Well, that's, I guess I'll start with a little bit of, I think what everybody knows or should know is that 85% of a child's brain develops by age 3. And so those first critical years between birth to age 3 are really, really important. And that's where PIDF provides valuable learning, and you can see in the video opportunities for our most remote and rural families to have a preschool near them, and we staff it with people from those communities to serve their communities. And so the chance for us to be able to do that is really, really important. They're all together. We serve about nearly 2,000 children and about 3,700 caregivers. So the beautiful thing about our programs is that while other family members are working, the people who are caring for the young children can come to a Tutu and Me or to a Kapa'alana, which serves mostly homeless or houseless families, or Napono no Na Ohana, which is in Waimanalo and serves families there, and have their children be getting the cutting edge research-based learning environment that is appropriate for their brain development. And so that is what is potentially that we're facing the loss of, those kinds of vital services. 70% of our participants, our children from birth to 5, are under the age of 3, which is, when you think about who are the infant and toddler caregiver learning environments out there, there aren't that many. There aren't that many, certainly like Tutu and Me, that serves thousands. So this is this is what we're really worried about, and trying to be very proactive in anticipating, getting out ahead of what's coming, not just waiting for it to happen, and calling on our partners, government partners, philanthropic partners, community members to help us strategize about how to protect our communities. How do we make sure that these services continue to exist?
And just to follow up on that, you're talking about the Native Hawaiian Education Act going from $45 million a year in annual funding down to 0. Mm-hmm. Have you been given any context or reasoning as to why the administration wants to make that kind of significant cut?
Well, I wouldn't speculate. I have no idea. I wasn't in the rooms when those decisions were made, but the current administration did provide a zeroed budget in the context of larger budget cuts to the U.S. DOE, and it's my understanding that they're trying to do away with that whole branch. So unfortunately, it ignores the kind of federal trust responsibilities of the federal government to Native Hawaiian communities as a Native peoples, and I think, it's really interesting when you think about the kinds of outcomes we're able to achieve as community organizations, probably at a lower cost than if the services were offered through government programs, but having children go to school ready for school, measured by norm reference tests. So we assess our children, we do external evaluations, highly rigorous data collection, because they're federally funded programs. We measure caregiver gains in their knowledge, and it's not only about how to be their children's best teacher forever, which is it's a ripple effect, right? So not only that one child, but all their siblings are impacted. But also we are able to take in things like nutrition, health. We have nurses come in and work with the parents. We have Project Vision. We do diapers. We give out diapers, which are sometimes in rural communities hard to get. We distribute food. We do what it takes to build trusting relationships with the families, because sometimes they don't have those. They don't have trusting relationships with institutions or organizations, and so we'll take the time to go say, hey, we're in your community. Here's what we want to do. We want to support you and your keiki. Come on out, and little by little, they do. And those kinds of trusting relationships take years, if not decades, to earn. And so one of our worries is if we have to shut down even for a few years, that really erodes our ability to be again to again provide the kinds of services that we have today. Staffing, all of the supplies, the way that we've been able to work with community partners to hold at site, at gyms, at parks, at faith-based, churches. Our office is in a church, a pastor's home. We really work hard to be very economical, frugal, financially, fiduciarily responsible, so that we can do the important work of caring for our babies.
Given what you know now, and I know that there are still some things that you're monitoring and working on, but what does that timeline look like for you? What is this runway of when services could start getting cut, and families and those in the community having to start to make plans and decisions based on what your organization is going to be available to do?
Thanks. That's a great question. There's a lot of uncertainty, which has been some of the fallout of the different federal initiatives. Is just preparing for all of the contingency scenarios. We still don't have confirmation, any guarantee that we'll even be able to serve this coming year. We hope to know that in about 30 days, which is when the government makes their approvals. And then after that, we're in a final year of our current grant cycle. So assuming we can deliver on the final year of our grant cycle, we'd be looking at next summer. And this gives us a little bit of an opportunity. So unlike other organizations where everything's been kind of slashed already, we have the opportunity to work together, to partner in finding ways to understand what's going to happen and how we can bring together the resources to continue services, especially where they are vitally needed, because there aren't many options. Just looking around, if you're looking at like Kauai, for example, we have 4 Tutu and Me sites there. They together serve about 200 families. And if we weren't there, I'm not sure who would be able to fill that puka for the families that really rely on our services. On the Waianae coast, we have Kapa'alana in 8 sites up and down the coast. And, from the Waianae Boat Harbor to the Hope Shelter, the homeless shelter right next to it. And it's an accredited preschool program offered at no cost to families. And when we went out there a couple months ago, I took my board, and one of the parents, they were all gathered, and they're like, we're really worried about our program. Is it going to be here for us? We find so much connection and value from what it provides. And so I just know that this opportunity to kind of talk with you folks and share kind of a call to action to really come together around strategizing for especially our families who are most vulnerable, in keeping these valuable services so that all children can start off kindergarten ready to learn and moving forward.
Yeah, and we always like to invite the audience. Thank you for those of you who are writing in. There's a question from Chuck who says, any chance of the congressional team from Hawaii going to the Trump administration and have a discussion about the negative impacts on your programs? I am curious about the conversations you are having with the delegation, because presumably our senators and Congress members are not happy with these decisions.
Yeah, we've been working really hard, just again, as a local nonprofit, trying to figure out, okay, what can we do? How do we rally up some awareness and information sharing? We've been working really hard to send letters to our congressional delegates, to provide written testimony to the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, to coalition build with Alaska, because the Alaska Native Education Program is also in that same boat, kind of zeroed out of the US DOE budget. And people have been quite supportive. Our congressional delegates are very supportive. I know they're fighting hard. And, the fact that the Senate did approve level funding for NHEP in their draft of their bill, and also we've just learned that the House did the same. So we're hopeful, and just a lot depends on chance. And so how do we not rely on chance? How do we take some surer steps forward and not wait? How do we be proactive? These are all the things that our advocacy and our coalition building are working to get out ahead of the curve that's coming. And also with HANO, with the Hawaii Association of Nonprofit Organizations, and the NCN, the national affiliate, the national head of that organization. It's been a really positive interaction too, to get to kind of share the story and ask for assistance in helping us, how do we Hawaii move forward so that our communities thrive?
Do you think that it is a realistic model, say that these cuts go through and you're now having to find yourself fundraising and asking the community support to sustain these services every year moving forward? I mean, it seems like that could be a pretty daunting task. Right now, you're just trying to make sure that you survive in this next chapter. But you also have to think long term. So how are you managing the short term goals, the strategic planning, but also long term goals, knowing this could be an issue for some time?
Yeah, that's an important question. It's about 15 million, about actually 20 million total that comes into the state of Hawaii for early childhood education, to the family participatory programs that we run alongside our partners. No single organization can come in and probably fill that gap. I mean, there are probably some that could, hint, hint, but let's just assume that the better strategy is diversifying revenue streams so that everyone shares a little bit. And that's what I know that for us to work hard and build different sources of funding to support communities, that's going to make us stronger in the long run. And so whether or not the NHEP is for the next year is reinstated or held at level funding, it's still important to have this conversation because there's too much at stake. We can't have our youngest, birth to 5-year-olds and their families going without valuable services that help them be ready, that help them be educated, that help them navigate poverty, houselessness, food insecurity. These are really important issues in our community. I know we all care about it. So that's why we're working really hard to share the word and ask for everyone's help.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think as a CEO of an organization like this, especially one that's been in community for so long, it seems that we talk to a lot of folks, and everywhere you turn, someone is feeling the impacts. And how do you plan for this? How do you run an organization with this much uncertainty?
Yeah, we have a lot of contingency scenarios. Okay, if this happens, we're going to do this. We're working really hard on, things like how would we consolidate our programs. And in addition to early childhood education, we also do a lot of work in the youth justice space. So with workforce development for youth 14 to 24 years old, that's also at risk of the same cuts. And just doing our best to streamline. If we come to the end next summer and we need to pull in our belts and weather the storm until we can build back up again, we're going to be here because we're going to deliver on our mission. That's not changing. We're going to be there for community. That's not changing. Just as leaders, that's our kuleana. That's our responsibility. So that's what we're doing, and we're going to stay hopeful and optimistic in that.
Well, we are unfortunately out of time. Do you have one final message maybe for the community, for those who are just becoming aware of the situation that you find yourself in, and just any last message you have?
I would say advocate. Hopefully we all care about these things. Advocate with our politicians, our policymakers, our federal congressional delegates, with our business community, with our philanthropic community. These are important matters to all of us, and so we welcome the help. And yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Kana'iapuni, thank you so much for being here today from Partners in Development Foundation. We really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
We'll be back right after this with an economist from UHERO to talk about how these impacts will affect the entire community and the economic sector. You're watching Spotlight Now.
Hello and welcome back to Spotlight Now as we continue on in our conversation of how the federal cuts are impacting Hawaii nonprofits. We again want to encourage all of you watching to engage in the conversation. You can head over to Facebook and enter your comments and questions for our guests.
And we are talking about millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars to the state. So what does that mean to our state's economy and the people who benefit from these programs? We're talking now to UHERO policy researcher and data scientist Trey Gordner. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We heard there some pretty stark testimony from Sean about what is happening at Partners in Development Foundation and just going from $45 million in the Native Hawaiian Education Act potentially down to zero. That has a huge impact on the economy of our state and, of course, all the kids that she's talking about. From your vantage point, what are we looking at when it comes to an economic impact of all of these potential federal cuts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we think about impact in a couple of ways. And first, before I talk about what those impacts are, it may help to understand how we've come to understand those impacts. And so we were contracted by the Hawaii Community Foundation to create a sort of early warning system for community leaders and policymakers looking at federal grants, contracts, the organizations that receive them, and the subsectors of the nonprofit sector that receive them, and asked to investigate the different risks that those organizations face. And so from that, we're looking at impacts to the beneficiaries, the direct impacts like we heard from Sean. We're looking at direct impacts to the nonprofits themselves who employ people and do a lot of great work in the community. And we're looking at indirect impacts on other organizations, including state and local governments, that could come about from these organizations no longer being able to serve those needs.
Wow.
Yeah, so maybe if you can provide some context when it comes to these nonprofits specifically, how wide range will this be, and just the overall impact that it could potentially also have on Hawaii's economy as you also look at those impacts as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing to note is that the direct impacts of federal funding for nonprofits will be concentrated. So there are not that many nonprofits in the state that receive federal funds directly, and of those, only about 1 in 4, according to our analysis, are dependent on those funds. That over 20% of their revenues come from federal funds. That said, there are a few organizations, like you heard about, where federal funds make all the difference. And so as we look at those organizations, these organizations employ thousands of people, and they serve important needs related to healthcare and particularly food. And so there is an economic impact associated with both of those things, but there's a much larger economic impact that we see in our forecasts from the ongoing effects of tariffs, for instance, the tourism slowdown, and especially cuts to programs through state and local governments, which are much, much higher than those going to nonprofits directly.
So all of that taken together, what is the impact, do you think? What kind of changes are you expecting us to feel?
Yes. We're working on our Q3 forecast right now, and so I don't want to put a number on it too much in advance, but I will refer back to our Q2 forecast, where we were projecting about a 4% drop in visitors for the coming year, and projecting a mild recession for Hawaii's economy beginning in 2026, right? So recession, people will start to see their incomes stagnate or come down a little bit. The overall economic output of the state will stagnate or come down a little bit in early 2026.
So if that happens, let's say we have this recession, we have this slowdown, we have nonprofits, a limited number, that rely on it more than, let's say, 50% or more than 20%, but still, not insignificant when you look at something like Partners in Development Foundation and other affiliated programs. So you have basically a weakening of the support system and a weakening of the economy. What is the impact to community?
Yeah. So there have been researchers in other parts of the country who have attempted to understand the overall effects of the budget reconciliation that came out recently. And the big thing to note from the budget reconciliation is that it's regressive. It is reverse redistribution. And so when we think about the community impacts, the impacts will be heavily concentrated among the lower income levels. And so as you sort of follow the line up, the better off you are now, the more benefits you might see from some of the changes in your taxes. The more that you rely on federal programs right now, the more trouble you may be in.
When you are kind of looking again at all of the different factors when it comes to Hawaii, with tourism, as you mentioned, the overall economy, and these potential cuts overall, is there any growth or anywhere that you see some sort of positive or areas where that could help compensate for maybe some of these areas where we are seeing a decline?
To some extent, yes. So for a while, UHERO has been noting that construction spending, especially around the Pearl Harbor dry dock, is coming down. That with the fires on Maui, there might be a one-time boost that would go a little bit longer. But recently, there was announced another considerable award, $8 billion, for Hawaii, Guam, and other parts of the Pacific from the Navy for additional construction. So that actually pushes out our time horizon for when we thought that construction boom would start to fall. And you'll see that discussed to some extent in Q3.
When we were listening to Sean, when she was talking about something like Tutu and Me, one of the things that struck me that there's sort of these wraparound services, right? So you have kids who are coming to the preschool program, maybe with their grandma or an auntie, but then they're also getting to see an eye doctor, and they're also getting to get a little bit of food, maybe from, another distributor. I'm interested to know, when we lose that, and at the same time, when we're talking about cuts to SNAP and cuts to Medicare, let's talk a little bit about those cuts as well and what you expect those impacts to be. Because we've talked to the governor at length about this, especially in the healthcare space, and he's very vocal about the impacts, especially here in Hawaii.
Yes, I mean, this is one of the things that it's most challenging for an economic research organization to model. It's not the things that come out most obviously in the data that we're working with related to federal spending, IRS filings, U.S. Treasury reports, and so forth. But it is very real. And so one of the things that we're sensitive to that we saw during COVID, for instance, is that the interactions of the cuts can actually create a lot of challenges for a very small number of people, and so or for a smaller number of people. And so, looking to the budget reconciliation, makes changes to the work requirements, where we'll see people up to 50,000 people potentially lose their Medicaid, as well as something like 20,000 losing at least some of their SNAP benefits. The key is that those are not mutually exclusive populations, right? Nationwide, about 60% of people who receive SNAP benefits are also on Medicaid. And so what we expect to see, what the state and local governments will see, what nonprofits will see, what hospitals will see, is concentrated risk among very vulnerable populations that are touched in many ways at once.
We have talked to officials on this program about the Rainy Day Fund and the state's efforts to plan for cuts or natural disasters and things. And we've seen an effort to build up this Rainy Day Fund, which has yet to be tapped or distributed. How do you think that sort of appropriation for this specific fund could potentially help in the federal cuts? And once that's tapped, what does that say then about our overall economy, and how does that change things overall? Because it appears that we kind of have this in the bank. As long as we don't have to touch it, we might be in a better space. But once we do, to support these things, maybe getting a little bit more desperate.
Yeah, I can't speak to the Rainy Day Fund specifically. What I can say is there in case of emergencies. That's its stated purpose. We have been investing in it over the years. The legislature has also been working to create additional cushions for the governor to work with, as well as the Act 310 funds to give to nonprofits who are affected. So, overall, I think we're in a cautious position, as we should be, and our policymakers will make those hard decisions when they come.
I'm wondering, you did say that there are only a handful or a smaller number of nonprofits that are reliant on federal funding. Shad was talking about over 70%, for instance, for PIDF. What are there specific sectors? Do they tend to be more in the Native Hawaiian space? Like who are the nonprofits you think that are most likely at risk? Not necessarily naming names, although you can, but more sort of general who they serve and what sectors they cover.
Sure. So under our analysis, we've looked at the official federal spending data, all of the grants that are awarded to nonprofits in Hawaii, how much money has been paid toward those grants so far, which organizations receive those grants, how much is it as a component of their revenues. So we do have this overall picture. And what we see is that on the policy risk side, where we see the likelihood of federal cuts coming and cuts that have already happened, these organizations are mostly concentrated in early education, in health, mental health, and in community and economic development. And yes, there is a strong overlap, we think, with organizations serving Native Hawaiians in particular. There are several federal programs serving Native Hawaiians, and we think that it's possible that they will be cut. Certainly we've seen that already with Sean proposed cuts because they lack that nationwide political support.
I'm just wondering, when you are looking at these forecasts, as you've mentioned, the Q3 report coming out, and as you take all these things into consideration, how often are you also looking at things that have done in the past? How much does history play into that? And has there been any precedence for what we are seeing here with these types of cuts? If you do look to the past to help make these projections and predictions of where we stand economically?
I think in the recent past, most nonprofits and perhaps policymakers are remembering COVID, especially because the cuts that we're talking about, the federal policy changes that we've seen, are so heavily concentrated in healthcare and in nutrition. We can imagine that food banks, hospitals, and others will feel some echoes of COVID in terms of the new unmet need that they have to account for.
I'm curious, sort of similar to what I asked Sean about how, in her position, how does she plan to run an organization when you have so many variables? How are you able to do these forecasts when you have so many variables? Because it does seem like it changes week to week, depending on the temperament of the executive and, those who follow his lead.
This is the job. Yuji. I spend a great deal of time, and not alone. There's an entire team of faculty, economists, researchers, students, and so forth that are sifting through the data from many different sources, public and private, to try to get a handle on what we're likely to see in the future. We're always, in some sense, doing the hard or perhaps impossible job of predicting the future, but we have a good track record based on all the information we've gathered, the work we've done in the past. So,
I'm just wondering, on what you've seen at the federal level with this latest draft of the president's budget, and there were a lot of different nuances. People said it took days for them to really get through and with a fine-tooth comb look at what was being cut, what was included, what was how much money was allocated here. Was there anything in your research or anything that maybe caught your eye or maybe have gone unnoticed, or something that people in Hawaii should be aware of, just of what kind of significant impact that it may have on our economy overall?
Yeah, I think it's very early to say. The president's budget is always a political message primarily. It is a statement of priorities and de-emphasizing priorities. And it's ultimately up to the legislature, right? The power of the purse rests with Congress. And that's where we're really focused. Congress will have the opportunity to either kind of double down on the cuts that have happened so far, for example, by zeroing out programs and grants in later fiscal years, like 2026, that have been subject to executive actions this year, or they might continue to fund those at level funding or even increase funding in their budget for the next few years. So I'd say it's a little early to call, but we're in fiscal year 26 budget cycle right now, and these are the questions to be asking.
I'm curious to know, because we have a fairly robust nonprofit sector here in Hawaii. Do you expect a lot of nonprofits or a number of nonprofits to have to go away?
I can't say for sure. What I can say is that, as before, the federal dependency is concentrated in just a few. What we've also done is looked at the sectors in which there's a great deal of concentration or a great deal of fragmentation in the sector overall, right? And so concentration, the idea is how much of the overall money that goes to that area in Hawaii is in the hands of one or a handful of organizations. And fragmentation, how many very, very small organizations with annual budgets of less than 100,000, no full-time staff, are there in that area? So we'll have more information about this when we publish a policy brief for the general public to consume at this level. But that's the way that we're thinking about these things.
Okay. Well, it was wonderful to talk to you. Thank you for the update. We know that your sector-wide report is coming out, I believe, 2 weeks. Give
yes,
or take?
Q3. Yeah, Q3 forecast. Yes.
We will look for that. Trey Gordner, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
We're
you.
going to be talking with Melissa Miyashiro from Hano after the break. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now.
From the moment you wake up.
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live. We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
First alert traffic is like always having a helpful passenger right next to you.
There's a crash up ahead in the left lane.
When we see a backup, we'll tell you live on TV
That doesn't look too good.
and send an alert to your phone.
I'll type, you drive.
First alert traffic on TV, streaming, and on the Hawaii News Now app.
Keeping you and your ohana safe.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suchi. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, welcome back to Spotlight Now. We're continuing on in our conversation talking about how cuts at the federal level are impacting Hawaii nonprofits and services that are provided to the various people within our community. If you have questions or comments, or maybe you're someone that has been impacted, we love to hear from you. You can head over to Facebook at Hawaii News Now and enter your comment or questions in our comment section.
Yeah, it's a pretty robust comment section right now. Thank you so much for those of you who are writing in. We want to get to our next guest, and that is Melissa Miyashiro, who is the head of Hano. That's the Hawaii Association of Nonprofit Organization. Thank you so much for being here today, Melissa.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So we heard from Sean sort of a first-person account of what's happening at her organization, and we know that she is her organization, very reliant on federal funding. And as Troy pointed out, there are organizations, it's just a small part of their budget. But what are you hearing overall about the change in the administration's priorities and how that is impacting the sector?
Yeah, well, we're hearing a lot. So I represent Hano, the Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofit Organizations, and we exist to support nonprofits in the state. So our entire mission is to support nonprofits in helping them to do their best work and to provide resources and training and build capacity so then they can go out and accomplish their missions in the communities. So this has been an incredibly challenging year for Hawaii nonprofits and nonprofits across the country. And what's been most difficult, and I think you've heard the theme throughout the conversations today, is that folks are juggling so much uncertainty. So it's been really difficult to plan. And it's not just nonprofits in health and human services, it's nonprofits in the arts, it's INA-based nonprofits. The impacts are really widespread and quite patchy. So that's been difficult to just keep track of.
I imagine that as your organization, you probably are feeling a lot of questions. Is there anything specifically, themes that are coming up, or specific sectors of those that you mentioned that are impacted that are maybe coming up more often than not about what could potentially happen to their organization and services?
Yeah, the most common inquiry we get is just help kind of processing what's coming out of the federal government and all the decisions and kind of the pace and speed with which announcements are being made, and seeking kind of the local translation for those impacts. So it's been really helpful to partner with the National Council of Nonprofits. So HANO is a state association, like there are state associations across the country that represent nonprofits in their jurisdiction. And the National Council, we all are part of this incredible National Council of Nonprofits that is really on the ground in DC, tracking impacts and just keeping all of us up to date on what's happening. And then HANO is doing its best to relay to Hawaii nonprofits what the local impacts are. So a lot of it's just, what does this mean for our organization? Do we have to make changes, and how can we be planning now amid this uncertainty to really strengthen our organizations for the future?
Well, when you are looking to provide that support, and I wanted to just get a broader context. So prior to these announcements happening, and that what we're hearing from the federal level, just the state of Hawaii nonprofits in general. We saw what happened after the Lahaina fires. A lot of focus went to supporting organizations and efforts on Maui, rightfully so. That ultimately impacted some other nonprofits as well in terms of giving and where things were being allocated. Overall, how do you get a sense of where Hawaii nonprofits stand right now, given this climate, given what's happened, but also taking into consideration the other factors that nonprofits were already dealing with prior to this?
Yeah, this isn't the first crisis that nonprofits have had to manage. And in fact, it's nonprofits who are at the forefront when crisis happens and are supporting our communities and supporting each other when things like this happen. So we were already juggling as a sector, fragile operational structures, fragile budgets. We've been really stretched thin. Burnout is a big problem for nonprofit leaders. So those are some of the things at HANO that we look to, support nonprofits with navigating these really difficult, challenging circumstances. So the nonprofit sector in Hawaii, there are about 8,000 nonprofits registered, but about 2,700 are financially active. And most of the nonprofits in Hawaii are pretty small and very local. So we're a really community-minded community in Hawaii. And nonprofits are there to support their neighbors, and really, if they see a need in their neighborhood, in their community, people step up to support their fellow residents.
I'm interested in some of the tension that Trey was talking about between we're seeing federal cuts to SNAP benefits, to Medicare. At the very same time, you would hope that the nonprofit sector could step up and kind of fill that void, but they are the ones who are also getting cut. What do you worry about the community in terms of impacts to quality of life?
Yeah, I think what's so challenging about this moment is we're seeing kind of a convergence of different crises. So we have costs are increasing. So not just for the communities that nonprofits serve, but also for nonprofits and their cost of doing business. We are also seeing a shifting landscape of funding, and we've been talking about that, not just with federal funding, but as that shifts in pretty dramatic ways, there are, other shifts that happen with philanthropy, and just that whole shifting landscape of how nonprofits are funded and how they, receive the funding to carry out their missions is changing. So we have this convergence of crises, and the potential, cuts to Medicaid, to SNAP benefits, and other really incredible programs that support our communities. That just means increased demand for services. So, we're juggling all of those simultaneously, and it's coming to a really critical moment for our communities.
I'm not sure that you'll have the answers to this, but I'll just ask it anyway. I wonder if those on the ground who are impacted or utilize the services of these nonprofits, who seek out help, if they're aware of the potential that could be coming down the pipeline. Because oftentimes many people are so focused on just making it day to day, making ends meet. And they may not know of the political ramifications or the conversations happening in DC that might impact them. Is communication being spread, I guess, to those who these services could impact, so that they at least have some warning that if and when these things happen, that they're not caught off guard?
Yeah, I mean, that's a part of what we hope to do at Hano, is to help the general public, help policymakers understand the impact of nonprofits and how they intersect with our just our daily lives. So, in times of crisis, nonprofits are, food bank and shelters and recovery centers. And even in everyday life, nonprofits are doing work in the background that often goes unnoticed. They're also sources of meaning and joy in our life, as arts and activities for our keiki in our churches and sports. So they're really this invisible backbone of our community, and people aren't always aware of how many connections they have to nonprofit organizations.
Yeah, I'm interested. The state had put aside in the last legislative session $50 million that is supposed to be this emergency fund for the nonprofit sector. That money has not been doled out yet. I know that Aloha United Way is helping to do the administration of some of that, but have you heard any more about that? I'm sure that your office gets a lot of calls about that fund.
Yeah, we know that nonprofits are anxiously awaiting to hear how they can apply for that funding. So that was intended to be emergency funding specifically for nonprofits that are facing federal funding cuts. And we're working with the many partners involved who are committed to seeing that funding get out the door to expedite that as much as possible, because we know nonprofits really need it.
Is there a message that you have for the community at large about how they can support nonprofits, or what they should be aware of? Because there often is so much information coming down, and we're hearing potential cuts. It might not happen, and often that might lead people to be a little bit more optimistic about what could potentially happen. Is there a real reason for concern, and should the community be galvanizing right now at this moment?
There is a real cause for concern, but we also know that Hawaii has a long history of coming together and supporting our neighbors and supporting our communities. So if anybody, any community, any state can really step up in this moment, we believe that Hawaii is the place that can do that. And so we encourage people to think about, nonprofits that may be in your community that you interact with on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And if you're in a position to donate or to volunteer, now is a really wonderful time to do that. Again, so many of our nonprofits in Hawaii are small and have small budgets, so that support really goes a long way.
When we asked Trey, he was saying that there are certain sectors that he thinks are going to be more heavily impacted than others, education, healthcare, and particularly in the Native Hawaiian space. I know that, you're part of a larger alliance of nonprofits across the country. What are you hearing from, your partners in other states in terms of the programs? Are they seeing similar issues? I know that Sean had talked about Alaska Natives facing similar issues to Native Hawaiians. Is that what you're seeing, in other states?
Yeah, it's kind of across the board, and kind of work that supports communities and supports our vulnerable populations are really being impacted. Also, arts and culture nonprofits are facing some pretty difficult challenges, and also INA-based organizations, and all of the progress that we've made on issues like climate change. We're really wrestling to move that forward under this administration.
With your organization having to support these nonprofits, but now having to take on the challenge of tracking what's coming down from Washington, D.C., I imagine that has added more work to your organization specifically, other than just the work that you were doing prior. How have you internally had to make those shifts to keep ahead of things, get communication out, and track what's happening from the federal level that could impact the community here?
Yeah, we've really had to adapt our programming and our focus at Hano. So one of the things that we're doing right now is thinking about how we can boost our own capacity to be a resource matchmaker for nonprofits, and really a help desk for nonprofits to help them navigate all of these challenges. So we're in the process of kind of starting that up. That's a role that we already played at Hano, but just are seeing a greater need to support more nonprofits in that way. And we're also also making a really dedicated and intentional effort to hear directly from nonprofit organizations. So we have been on the road with our Hano huddles, which are listening sessions across the islands. So we've been visiting neighbor islands to hear a little bit more, at a personal, local level, what nonprofits are experiencing. So then we can take that information. We'd love to compile relevant data, these insights from nonprofits into a report that we can share with the public, we can share with decision leaders, and really advocate on behalf of the nonprofit sector in this time.
What have those conversations been like?
They have been both challenging but also uplifting. Anytime that I'm in a room with nonprofit leaders and staff, I'm always uplifted by their passion, their dedication to their missions and the people that they serve, and also dedication to their staff. We often don't think of nonprofits as employers, but they're part of our economy and make up about 10% of the civilian workforce. So they're also our neighbors. And part of our community. So the people that work in nonprofits are always inspiring to me.
I'm wondering if there a difference between the national organizations that have chapters in Hawaii as opposed to those Hawaii-specific nonprofits. Because when you think about some of these nonprofits, a lot of them are part of a larger American, or the countrywide organization that might have more support, that can rely on the structure of a corporate structure, as opposed to those who are standalone services for Hawaii. Are you seeing any difference between the two, or differentiate the difference between what services might be more impacted and which services and organizations might be more vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, I think for nonprofits that are connected to a national group, really have an opportunity to share resources, information resource. If there are, funding resources or opportunities for collaboration, that's helpful too. But what's been really great about collaborating with the National Council of Nonprofits is that they can keep a pulse, and we know they've got the ground game covered in DC, and so that as Hano, we can really keep our focus on local impacts to Hawaii nonprofits. And I imagine nonprofit organizations that are part of a larger network are experiencing something similar. It actually helps them, better show up for their local chapter.
There are some folks in the comments who are wanting to know where they can get the data. Kona Swain writing in, is there a website where I can find out more? I'm thinking that she's referring to the Nonprofit Insights report that you were sharing with us. When can we expect that, and what are you expecting to share, and where can they find it?
Yeah, well, we'll be sharing it on the Hano website and through our social media channels and our email list. So that's a great place to connect with the work that Hano is doing. So we're having these listening sessions over the next month, and we hope to have the report published and public by the end of this year.
Okay, and we will have you back on to share some of those details.
Great.
Because we are very interested in this sector as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Melissa, just a final word, for folks. I think it gives people a lot of worry, to think about something like Tutu and Me just going away. What do you say to the community as we approach all this uncertainty?
Just that, again, if any place can stand up and come together and collaborate in new ways and really build collective power, I believe it's Hawaii. And I believe it's the nonprofit sector. Nonprofits see folks through the darkest of times, and we have an opportunity to come together, collaborate in new ways to support all those that are feeling this really heavy and intense moment.
Okay, we appreciate all the work that you're doing, and we appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now.
From the moment you wake up.
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live. We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suchi. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, an interesting conversation today as we discuss how local nonprofits are being impacted by what could potentially come from the federal government. What we've continued to hear throughout this process and this conversation is that these and those individuals who are working in this field are preparing for it. There's still that level of uncertainty of what could potentially happen as Congress gets back into session to see if there are ways to maybe save some of this, but there seems to be still a lot of questions unanswered.
Yeah, and what's so difficult is that there's such a wide scale, right? You heard from Trey there saying that there are a large number of organizations who only rely on federal funding to a small degree, but then you have a group like Partners in Development Foundation from Sean Kanai'opuni, and she's sharing that it's over 70% of her program. She's touching thousands of children, many homeless families who are reliant on these preschool programs, as well as folks from lower socioeconomic, outcomes. And so what is that going to do to that community at the same time, that you hear the governor when he comes on here talking about cuts to Medicare, cuts to SNAP benefits. So the need could increase while at the same time the ability of these nonprofits to actually provide these services could go away.
And also the impact that it will have on Hawaii's economy as a whole. We heard from Uhiro about just what they are considering as they look to project this next forecast going into the third quarter of the year, and how all of these types of cuts from the federal level, as well as what could be happening for these social services that could also be cut, while factoring in tourism numbers and all these other factors that they look to, how that all plays into the health of Hawaii's economy and where things stand moving forward for the rest of the year.
Yeah, so Melissa Miyashiro, we're going to invite her back when they are done with that report from the Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofits to talk about what the results and what they've seen. Next week, we'll be talking to someone who has deep insights in the budget, and that, of course, is Governor Josh Green. Where does he think all of this is shaking out, and what is he doing to push our delegation?
That's right, and he has been on the road for a few weeks now, so get an update for how his travels were, and also being very vocal about what's happening at the federal level as well. So we hope you join us right back here next week, Tuesday, for another episode of Spotlight Now.
Aloha.